Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's edition of Behind the Map. My guest for today is Allen Carroll, Program Manager for Storytelling at Esri. Allen has been a cartographer for over 40 years and founded the Story Maps team at Esri. Prior to Esri, he worked at National Geographic for 27 years in a variety of positions, including Art Director of National Geographic Magazine and Chief Cartographer at National Geographic Maps. Thanks so much for joining us today, Allen. Can you talk a little bit about why storytelling is so important and powerful?
Sure. Well, storytelling, it's become quite a kind of thing these days. A lot of people talk about storytelling, but for very good reason. It's really one of the main things that makes us human. So at some point, of course, we evolved language, and I'm quite convinced that language and storytelling kind of evolved together, that it's really a basic way that humans communicate with one another and the basic way we make sense of the world. And also a way we turn a sometimes very complex series of events into something that's more of a narrative, more easily understood.
Interesting. When in the intro, we talked about the fact that you've worked at National Geographic for almost 30 years. How did your time there really spark your interest in merging storytelling and maps together?
Actually, my interest was sparked when I was 4 or 5 years old. I used to stare at a wall map of the world that was on the wall of my bedroom. I'd lie in my bunk bed and stare at that map and try to glom Africa and South America together. But fast forward a whole bunch of years, I was really fortunate at National Geographic to inherit an already really rich tradition of cartography, mostly in print form. And that was a great honor and great fun. But I was also doing that at a point where the world was changing in terms of entering the digital age, and that maps suddenly could play new roles in new media, and that was a really exciting thing to experiment with, and led pretty naturally to what I've done since then at Esri.
Do you think National Geographic was ready for that pivot to kind of the digital mapping? They have a long legacy as a print magazine. Was there any kind of, what was that conversion like?
The conversion was long and sometimes painful. First step was just taking what had been, of course, this beautifully handcrafted cartography and turning it into digital data and integrating it with databases and things like that. So that's a long and sometimes tedious but essential process. But then the other was, this notion of kind of repurposing or rethinking maps for a new medium was difficult in other ways. Sometimes frankly, kind of politically, and sometimes we faced a little bit of resistance from people who didn't really know how exciting geography is and was becoming as these changes, not just the advent of the digital age, but things like satellite imagery and remote sensing and global positioning systems and things like that. So it was a very exciting time for cartography and maps, but sometimes a little challenging to convince my peers to jump on the bandwagon.
So, kind of along those lines, why is it so important for maps to tell stories? And is there something uniquely powerful about maps in a digital format where you can incorporate, maybe more elements that you could in a print map, like multimedia or other types of media?
Well, you probably know that I'm going to answer that maps bring, some really cool things to storytelling. They provide context. They sort of anchor you, obviously, to location. Maps are incredibly dense with information, so they can add so much richness to stories that just are almost impossible to do in other ways, including video and photos, audio, etc. Although the latter also add another dimension. And so I think maps and other multimedia are kind of complementary. Maps can be a little dry and didactic, but photos can really grab at your gut. So you can combine those two to good effect.
Are there other elements that you can include in a map beyond maybe visuals, like beyond stills or videos?
Well, we haven't quite tackled the sense of smell yet, but there are other things, including, of course, things like infographics that can complement maps or stand on their own. Embeds are another opportunity. And Esri has an array of apps that can also be integrated with story maps in interesting ways. So one example is our survey app, Survey 123, which we can integrate into a story map to enable a sort of simple form of crowdsourcing. So people can fill out a form about, say, their favorite place in nature and post it and refresh the map, and their post is visible in essentially real time.
Have you explored the use of audio? Do you think there's a role to play for audio in story maps?
Oh, absolutely. Our first experiment with audio was a story called Sounds of the Wild West, and we worked with a partner organization that had an archive of nature sounds in the West to add sound effects to everything from growling grizzly bears to songbirds in prairies and meadows. And I think people kind of underrate sound as a means of communication. It can really add richness and another sort of form of context to stories.
So I know we've talked about story maps a few times now. What kind of spurred you to create that as a concept and as almost as a product and information type? And how have they evolved and kind of what has been the impact on storytellers?
My first experience with multimedia storytelling with maps happened at National Geographic. So I was thinking, this National Geographic is known for beautiful images and beautiful cartography. And as the web was really taking off, it occurred to me that those two brand assets could be combined to tell stories in interesting ways and perhaps enable people to create their own stories. So we came up with what was called geo stories. And then after I moved to Esri, we were able to carry that notion farther with a key addition of making it really easy via builder functions for people to create stories using our, employing our user experience without needing to have any web development skills. And when we came up with that, that's when things really started to take off.
How have people responded to this? Have you seen any impacts on storytellers?
Well, the response has been just hugely exciting and gratifying. So we're now at about 3.5 million story maps hosted on Esri's cloud service, ArcGIS Online. And it's become a primary means by which geographic information specialists can tell their own stories and share the results of their analyses. It's also, to a surprising extent for me, but very exciting, become very popular in the education realm. So actually over half of the activity associated with ArcGIS story maps is coming out of the education community. Especially, of course, students creating their own stories, often as alternatives to research papers.
So has there been anything on the story maps journey that you've wanted to explore, but you haven't had the opportunity to really dig into yet?
I'm happy to say there hasn't been very much. It's been a really delightful period of time when I've been, given great support by the organization and by the community in being able to develop these tools to tell stories of all sorts.
That's fantastic. I'm so thrilled to hear about the uptake specifically in the educational space. So I know you've mentioned that, really you've built these tools in a way that they're simple and easy to build these stories. But what tips do you have for someone who wants to tell stories with maps? What should they keep in mind if they want to explore this?
Well, one is to think first and foremost about your audience. Who is your primary audience, and what are the one or two or at most maybe three things that you want them to learn about or become inspired by. Another thing that I think about often try to think about often, is to not let one of the story map elements kind of predominate in your creative thinking. So in other words, most people when they're coming up with a story will do a text outline using, a word processing program or something. And the danger there is that you think, well, okay, I'm going to create this written story and then I'm going to throw a few things in to illustrate it. But I think it's important to think about text, photos, videos, and of course maps as equal citizens, and that you try to think about what each one of those mediums how each one can contribute to a full multimedia story.
Well, fantastic. This was really interesting, and I think that'll do it for today's edition. Thanks again for spending some time with us, Allen. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Robbie. Great to be here.